All right, it is my pleasure. You guys see me back again. It is my pleasure to introduce to you guys our keynote speaker, Amber O'Neal Johnston. Amber is an established authority on including diverse voices in traditional curricula and infusing culture and love for others into an intentional home environment. She shares her observations on education, living books, and world schooling at heritagemom.com and connects with followers on Instagram at heritagemomblog. She is a regular contributor to the wildly successful, Wild and Free homeschooling community, a frequent podcast guest on popular shows, and a coveted speaker at homeschool education and parenting conferences. A product of public education and daughter of 2 public school principals, Amber never expected to fall head over heels in love with homeschooling. During one late night session of perusing educational philosophies, Amber stumbled upon the work of the 19th century British educator, Charlotte Mason, and her home education principles. Convinced that homeschooling was a path of life-giving to a life-giving home, Amber embarked on a journey from stay-at-home mom to homeschooling enthusiast. After wholeheartedly committing to follow a mainstream Charlotte Mason curriculum to homeschool her children, Amber became discouraged when months went by with little mention, if any, of the stories and accomplishments of Black people in her schoolroom. While the literacy quality of books may have been superior, she found that cultural emptiness she experienced as a schoolgirl was being perpetuated within the walls of her own home. Devoted to bridging the gap for her 4 children, Amber began uniquely merging traditional classics with life-giving books, as well as creating a culturally rich home environment to ensure that her children's education honored their background, individuality, and self-worth. Convinced that other families, regardless of their school choices, might be missing out on their inherent freedom to educate the whole child, Amber began sharing her personal stories and the resources she used to infuse her schoolroom with her own and others' cultures. She did this in a celebratory way. In addition to private consulting and running a local nonprofit homeschool group, Amber is a go-to voice on curating every aspect of a culturally rich and inclusive home. Amber speaks, writes, and shares her observations on inclusive and culturally rich home education, family history, life-giving books, the beauty of homemaking, global travel, and more. And when asked about her path, she likes to smile and say, "In my house, Charlotte Mason has an afro." Let's welcome Amber O'Neal Johnston.
Hello, everyone. I'm so excited to be here to talk with you today. And as I get started, I just want to take a moment and bring you into the spirit of where we are with something that I know will be familiar to you, and you guys can join in with me. So I grew up hearing my grandmother hum that song while she made cornbread muffins in the kitchen each afternoon during our periodic visits to my grandparents' small, teeny tiny town in Southern Illinois. And in my 20s, I learned that that familiar music my grandmother hummed was actually the tune of a Negro spiritual. About a decade later, my ears perked up as I recognized the song while watching Alvin Ailey's breathtaking 1960s signature ballet Revelations right here in the front row of Atlanta's Fox Theater. It wasn't until I began homeschooling, though, that I understood the full backstory of that song, what seems like a straightforward reference to the Israelites' escape out of Egypt was actually a coded song that contained explicit instructions to fugitive slaves on how to avoid capture and the route to take to successfully make their way to freedom. That information was so eye-opening to me back then. I know a lot of people are like, oh, I know that, but did you know that back in the day? I did not know that. It was so eye-opening to me that I began to learn more about the Fisk Jubilee Singers, the first to ever publish the song. And my hunger to learn more about the backstory of other familiar songs from my childhood led me to pursue books as mirrors in my homeschool for my children to understand more about their heritage and to link the childhood songs I share with them to their great-grandmother that they never had the delight of knowing and on back to other generations of our family. Today, a decade into our homeschooling journey, I can rattle off dozens of examples of other books that serve as beautiful mirrors within my home, but it hasn't always been this way. Originally, I was blind to my family's need for these kinds of books. I never questioned whether I could or should alter the plans. I wanted to offer my children the same truth and beauty and goodness that I saw all the other moms online talking about. And so I did what they did the way that they did it in the hopes of capturing some of the magic that they were experiencing in their homes. And to be honest, I was content with this path and would probably still be on it if it wasn't for my oldest child. A bird that stalks down his narrow cage can seldom see through his bars of rage. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. Maya Angelou. About 8 years ago, my daughter was in a narrow cage, so she opened her throat to sing. She first responded to her confinement with silent protest when she rejected the black baby dolls that I found shoved in the back of the closet she shares with her sister. When asked about her peculiar behavior, she simply and honestly stated that the dolls with brown skin were ugly and she only wanted to play with the pretty white dolls. Following that encounter, her caged bird song manifested audibly as she began incessantly questioning whether she would be the only brown person at ballet, at the park, at Sunday school, in Costco, at a birthday party. In what seemed like a matter of weeks, but was actually months, she began shifting from an outgoing, spunky girl who never met a stranger to a sullen, withdrawn girl who no longer found joy outside the safe four walls of our home. This was completely shocking for me and my husband because we had gone out of our way to not talk about race or to make a big deal about skin color. We wanted to raise our children to look at people's hearts and not what was on the outside. So her hyper focus on the outside felt like a gut punch. As I look back at what was happening, I can now see blaring alarms, but at the time when I was living through it, I really felt that she would outgrow it. I focused on the similarities that we all have as humans and continued to repeat that we were all the same on the inside. But rather than improving, she only got worse over time, and it would take hours to share everything that happened, but I'll skip to one very pivotal point for us. One day we went on a field trip to a historical living museum. Most of the activities were outdoors, and there was only one bathroom. So before we got back on the road, it was out in rural Georgia. It's moved now. I can't even remember the name of the town, but rural Georgia, far away from Atlanta. And before we got back on the road to head home, my daughter and I went to use the restroom while one of my friends watched all our littles outside. There was a really long line for the bathroom, and it was like in this like old wooden cabin. I was like, they're taking the whole history thing all the way through. And we waited and we waited, and while we were waiting, we watched all these women go into the stalls and come out and wash their hands and dry their hands and leave. When it was finally my girl's turn, she went potty, she washed her hands, but when she went to put her hands under the automatic dryer, nothing happened. And she tried to shift her hands all around, and I know that's happened to all of you before, so you understand what was happening, but for whatever reason, her little hands just weren't triggering the sensor. But instead of shrugging it off, she got very frustrated and very loudly in a very quiet rural Georgia bathroom full of non-Black people, she says, "Well, I guess these dryers only work for white people." And I was like, oh, okay, that's what we're doing. All right, so needless to say, I let my hands air dry, and I quickly ushered her out of the bathroom cabin and out to the car. And when I got to the van, I wanted to turn around and say, "What is wrong with you?" But I didn't want to scare her into silence. What I wanted more than anything was to know the truth. I was embarrassed. My armpits were sweating. I couldn't understand why she would say such a crazy thing, and to say crazy things out loud, that's crazy stuff we say at home, if you have something you want to share with me. But I kept myself together, and I calmly said, "Honey, I noticed that you had a hard time in the bathroom. What was going on?" And what she said changed me forever. She said, "Well, the dryer worked for all the white people, and it wouldn't work for me because they made everything and they know how everything works." And knowing that we were in the middle of a watershed moment, I quickly followed up with, "Why would you say that?" And she said, "Because you said we learn important things in school and we only learn about white people." At that moment, my heart shattered into a million pieces, and I realized that in my attempt to not make a big deal about skin color, to be colorblind, I made her feel as though she were invisible and that people like us just didn't matter. As I witnessed my daughter withering, I knew something bad was happening, but I didn't know how to stop it. I wanted to rip out the roots of whatever invasive thoughts were crowding her mind, but I couldn't find the source, and she persisted. The caged bird sings with a fearful trill of things unknown but longed for still, and his tune is heard on the distant hill, for the caged bird sings of freedom. I was awakened one night by the presence of something in my room. A lot of parents will have that feeling. And I was a bit startled to find my little girl standing at my bedside, staring at me with tears streaming down her face. I assumed that she'd had a bad dream, but when I asked her what was wrong, my caged bird opened her throat to sing and said, "I can't sleep because I can't stop thinking about how ugly I am. I hate my skin and my hair is disgusting, and I don't want to look like this anymore." So many lies. The lies that she believed about herself were absurd. The lies that we believe about ourselves are just as absurd. This girl with luscious curly hair that everyone, including me, would die for, felt that it was weighing her down. A caged bird stands on the grave of dreams. His shadow shouts on a nightmare scream. His wings are clipped and his feet are tied, so he opens his throat to sing. As I thought of how I could help my daughter become free, I couldn't shake the thought of one thing she said in my arms that night. As I was telling her how beautifully and wonderfully made she was, how every fiber of her being was known and knitted by a master artisan who makes no mistakes, as I earnestly tried to get her to accept her skin and hair the way they were intended to be, she asked me in the middle of sniffles, "Well, why don't you wear your hair the way you were made?" The wounds inflicted by an honest child are among the most painful. The mother that she knew had bone straight hair. I had never seen my natural hair as an adult and had no clue what it looked like. My mom bless her heart, as we say down south, began putting a chemical relaxer on my hair, as did most Black moms in the 80s when I was only 8 years old. So every 6 weeks or so for the next 30 years, until that night with my daughter, I would return to a salon wherever I happened to be in the country or even the world to have my roots straightened or touched up. I never questioned the process because essentially it was all I knew. And over the years, I gained a reputation with my hair. My straight tresses hung down my back, and year after year, they became a point of compliment from everyone. My hair was part of my signature look, and I wore it as a crown of glory. Having my daughter question my motives and actions as they related to my hypocrisy was bone-chilling. What kind of skin was I willing to put into the game on behalf of my little girl? While I was wrestling with this, I was reminded of a movie I watched, ironically, when I was pregnant with her in 2009. In My Sister's Keeper, Cameron Diaz plays the mother, and her oldest daughter has leukemia. So all of her hair has fallen out, and she doesn't want to get out of bed to go on an outing with her family. So when her mom keeps pushing and challenging her, the girl sits up in bed finally, and she says, "I'm tired. Don't you get that? I'm sick, and I'm tired, and I'm ugly. And don't you dare tell me that I'm beautiful, because I'm not. And don't you dare tell me that nobody's going to stare at me, because they will, because I'm a freak." And with that, her mom walks out of the room, and the next thing her family hears are the clippers. She went into the bathroom and shaved off all her hair so her daughter would not have to be bald alone. That mom knew at that moment that there were no words, because sometimes words are not enough. There are times when we as parents are called to show with actions a type of love that words just cannot express. So please know that I'm not sitting here today comparing my daughter's identity issues and feelings to having leukemia, because those things don't compare. But self-hatred, born of invisibility, is an affliction that spreads just like cancer. And while the body may sustain, it kills the soul. That night, as I held my girl, my mouth and my heart made a vow that my mind was not on board with. The next morning, I felt physically ill because I vividly recalled promising her that I would stop straightening my hair, and I didn't want to do that. To heal my daughter, I had to wreck myself, and not just my body, mind you, but my sense of self. I had to come face to face with who I was and what I felt about myself and my heritage, and it was so much more than just the hair. How could I ask my child to show up authentically in this world when I couldn't even do it? How could I admit that I didn't know how to teach her about Black people because I had never learned myself? And even worse, how could I admit that there was an ugly part of me that felt like infusing us into every nook and cranny of our home would somehow set her back on the road to success? How could I ask her to be confident in who she was when I was still wearing the plastered smile that I'd learned to put on when I was her age? We wear the mask that grins and lies. It hides our cheeks and shades our eyes. This debt we pay to human guile. With torn and bleeding hearts, we smile and mouth with myriad subtleties. Why should the world be overwise in counting all our tears and sighs? Nay, let them only see us while we wear the mask. We smile. But, oh, great Christ, our cries to thee from tortured souls arise. We sing, but, oh, the clay is vile beneath our feet and long the mile. But let the world dream otherwise. We wear the mask. Paul Laurence Dunbar. There was no chance of me going back on my words, so I grabbed the metaphorical clippers and went to work. No, I did not shave all my hair off at once, but I vowed not to alter a single curl that grew from my scalp, and I slowly cut off the straight crown and let this curly wreath grow in. It was a long and painful process, and I looked completely crazy for a few years. So if you met me during that time, now you know what was going on. But now that I'm on the other side of it, and this big hair don't care mama can look at her little girls and say, we got this. So why all the talk today about hair and skin and looks? Aren't we supposed to be talking about homeschooling? And shouldn't we compliment our children on how strong they are and how smart and how capable and how kind and how good they are at STEM and STEAM? And here I am talking about being pretty and Black. And that's because sometimes we can take things too far. As I tried not to focus on or compliment Nina's looks, I sent an unconscious message that there was nothing worth commenting on. There's so much space that lies between idolizing looks and simply wanting to hear that you're beautiful, wanting to see your image reflected in the world around you. Our family was not a symbol of order for my child. It wasn't a safe place where my daughter could believe in herself or in me. She was struggling to know without a doubt that she was made in his image. Instead, she felt like she was a visitor in someone else's world, a little like this. It's jarring when we see this image in reverse, but for some reason, so many of us have normalized this life for our own children. We're all charged with considering the areas of our family life in which we are asleep. As parents in general, and especially as home educators and micro school educators, we are called to remain awake to our home atmosphere beyond just how we teach math and which science curriculum we use. As this awakening process was happening in my home, a radical shift occurred, because I also had to contend with the books and experiences, the experts and resources being used to educate my children. And where we landed is primarily why I'm here with you today, to let you know that heritage matters. My heritage matters. Your heritage, it matters. Representation matters. Ignoring skin color and race and culture and language and ethnicity and family history and heritage does not make any of it go away. Raising children to operate in the world the way we wish it existed rather than the way it is allows ignorance and negativity to fester. And whether your child acts her feelings out for all to see the way my daughter did, or whether he wears the mask and seems fine, ignoring who they are and where they come from will only delay their day of reckoning. It is coming. It's obvious to anyone who can see me today that I have a rich heritage. There is so much for me to pull from as I bring my culture within grasp of my children's hearts. Black people the world over, no matter their background, have an amazing heritage to claim as their own. There are books to be read and recipes to be shared, music to be hummed, poems to be memorized, hymns to be sung, words to be spoken, and gestures to be understood. There are stories to be told and sacred places and spaces to behold. Black people have a rich history to be brought into their homes and breathed over their children. But what does that mean? How can you genuinely reflect Black culture and honor the history and heritage of others within your home? Despite what we may think, the most critical part of our children's environment is not what's hanging on the wall or the lesson plans that we put together or the habits we're trying to form. The biggest factor in a child's environment are the voices of the adults speaking into them. So to build a culturally rich environment, we have to start with ourselves. Think about how you reflect your cultural background. How does it manifest physically or mentally, and how do you feel about it? And by physically, I don't just mean the way that you look. I mean your physical space. Are there things in your home or school environment that speak to who you are and where you came from? Do you speak positively of the people who came before you and their contributions to this world? Do you help your children connect the dots between who they are and those who came before them and the legacy they're leaving for those who are coming behind? Relish your role as a purveyor of culture within your home. Talk to your kids about all the things. Tell them the mundane and the important. Share about your experiences growing up. Have them interview relatives and family friends. Research their ancestry. Really dig in. Find out about regional differences and the nuances of communication. Get to know our people's recipes and artistry. Listen to the music and talk about all of it. Not only as an assignment or a project or a unit study, but as a way of life. Sometimes when I speak about claiming our heritage and celebrating who we are, I'm met with resistance from well-meaning and not so well-meaning people who feel like this type of thinking is moving our society backwards instead of forward. These people tend to believe that a colorblind approach to childhood is the best route because if we just stop talking or exploring our differences, eventually everyone will come to see that we're all the same. And while I wholeheartedly disagree, I don't condemn those who feel this way because I once held the same beliefs. That's what we were taught growing up. So it only makes sense that we would continue to grasp at a colorblind philosophy to education unless our beliefs are disrupted. My daughter disrupted my beliefs. And since then, I've come to find that colorblind living is not only unrealistic, it's actually harmful for our children. Ignoring our own culture is a futile attempt to be colorblind is not going to bring us closer together. It's actually a colorful approach that builds bridges. Being seen and known are things that the human heart longs for. It's not noticing or celebrating our culture that causes division. It's the judgment and prejudice that people attach to these things that tears us apart. In fact, the more tethered your child is to their own sense of self and belonging, the more emotional space they have to empathize with others and to reach out across the aisle and become true comrades. I can't show solidarity with any of you if I don't even know who I am. I can't recognize your humanity if I haven't even accepted mine. People who feel like they belong will more easily connect with others, and that connection can transcend hardship and hard truths. My child was determined to be seen, and her insistence revealed that I was perpetuating the same cultural emptiness that I had experienced as a schoolgirl. I began seriously studying the concept of cultural representation in literature, and my research led me to an article written by Nancy Lyric, the former president of the International Reading Society. And in this article, she said that non-white children are learning to read and to understand the American way of life in books, which either omit them entirely or scarcely mention them. There's no need to elaborate upon the damage, much of it irreparable, to the Black child's personality. This is a spot-on assessment of what's happening in many public, private, and home-based learning environments today. So imagine my surprise when I looked at the bottom of the page and saw that this article was published in 1965. I later came across the work of Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop and her writing on the concept of books as mirrors. And the more I researched, the more sense it all made. She wrote, "When children cannot find themselves reflected in the books they read, or when the images they see are distorted, negative, or laughable, they learn a powerful lesson about how they are devalued in the society of which they are a part." As soon as I read that, I recognized the issue taking root in my own home. And as I began sharing openly in public forums, whether it be conferences or teacher in-service workshops or just with my friends at the park, I found that children in homes and classrooms everywhere were lacking literary mirrors, Black and brown children. Over a decade before I was born, experts like Lyric raised the alarm that something was terribly broken in our children's literary world. Yet I grew up with very few books as mirrors. Roll call for Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry. If not for that, Mildred D. Taylor saved a girl, right? There wasn't anything happening. And 25 years later, Bishop sounded an identical alarm, but my daughter was still living without substantial literary mirrors. And now today, new voices are ringing cowbells and laying on the horn and screaming into the mic and banging their heads against the wall while our children carry on searching for their reflections in vain. So, what exactly is a literary mirror? A mirror is a book that reflects a child's own culture or personhood and helps build their identity. In literary mirrors, children can find themselves, their families, and their communities reflected and valued. When reading books where they see characters like themselves moving through the world, they feel a sense of belonging. My call today, and I want to be clear about this, is not to supplant the stories of white people, but rather to greatly expand our stories. I want to present a healthier and more accurate view of the world to our children. And if curricula are to be truly beautiful, they have to reflect the vibrant, diverse 21st century world in which we live, the world in which our children are being raised. And to give our children 12 years of lessons in which Black people only show up as slaves and maybe boycotters, if they show up at all, is an act of aggression against the very people we love most in the world. So I know charts are hard to see, but I'm just going to explain the overall thing going on here. Each year, the Cooperative Children's Book Center, CCBC, releases the number of children's books by and about BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, people of color, and of the books received from U.S. publishers in 2018, and that's the last one that I had all the full numbers and charted for, but I looked up the most recent year last night, and it's changed minuscule changes. These numbers show the percentage of total books that had at least one primary character identified as belonging to one of the following groups. Okay, so you can see here, our friend here, the white boy has a whole floor-length mirror and a disco ball that reflects back to him, and there's like mirrors on the ceiling and all down the walls and on the floor. And then next up we have Bear, and Bear has a really nice mirror as well, showing his whole body. And then you have our kids at 10% of the books, and we can go on to 7 and 5 and, God forbid, 1%, right? And let's look at this another way. So these are the same numbers, but here it's showing own voices. So you just look at those percentages. Like, let's look at the box of the top left with the Black girl in the orange book. So it was only 10% of the books, and only just under half of them, let's just call it half, were own voices books. Own voices is a term coined by the writer Corinne Duvis, and it refers to an author from a marginalized or underrepresented group writing about their own experiences from their own perspective, rather than someone from an outside perspective writing as a character from that underrepresented group. So Kayla Whaley from Disability and Kid Lit explains that even when portrayals of diverse characters by majority group authors are respectfully and accurately done, okay, so even when they're done well, there's an extra degree of nuance and authority that comes with writing from lived experience. Those books that are own voices have an added richness to them precisely because the author shares an identity with the character. The author has the deepest possible understanding of the intricacies, the joys, the difficulties, the pride, the frustration, and every other possible facet of that particular life because the author has actually lived it. Now, I don't want to say I gave this talk one time and then, I have a fan group of haters online, and they like to pick apart my talks and then write articles about it and do all of that. They have so much time. I'm wondering, do they have kids at home or whatever? And they said, she said Black people should only read books that are written by other Black people. And that's not what I said. What I said was they should be given preference. I don't see why they wouldn't be. If I wanted to read a book about what's happening in Ukraine, I'd want to hear from a Ukrainian. And if I want to read a book about soul food Sundays, I'd like to hear from someone who's had one. So I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but prioritizing isn't the same as saying I won't read anything. My kids have plenty of books written by non-Black people with Black characters, and we love them. So hear me when I say what I said what I said. But I do think prioritizing is worthy. And it's important to point out that half of the time when you pick up a child's book with Black characters, it wasn't written by a Black person. So what does that mean? You need to read it first. The picture books, you need to read it first, because I can tell you, sometimes you turn the page and you're like, and you're trying to ad lib, but then the kids get old enough. Wait, why'd you skip that page, Mama? And I'm like, oh, nothing. And for chapter books, when the kids get ahead of you and you can't keep up, you can't pre-read everything. That's what I'm here for. heritagemom.com. I already read all these. So I saw a TEDx talk with Taiwanese children's author Grace Lin, and she was talking about what happens when you never see anyone in a book who looks like you. And she said these words about her childhood. There was nobody who looked like me anywhere. There was nobody who looked like me in school. There was nobody that looked like me in the movies. There was nobody who looked like me on TV or in the magazines. And most importantly, there was nobody that looked like me in the books that I loved. How could I create any vision to share with the world when I had never even looked at myself? My books are the books I wish I had when I was a child. So for those of you that don't know Grace Lin, her novel, Where the Mountain Meets the Moon, has been called a Chinese Wizard of Oz. And Lin calls her main character, Ming Li, an Asian Dorothy. And the book won the Newbery Honor Award. This is an example of the importance of own voices and that movement. Lin created the mirror she wishes she'd had when she was a little girl, and we need to do the same for our own children. And a point I want to add about own voices. Yes, we want to prioritize those, but again, you have to be a discerning person, because just because they're own voices doesn't mean they're a good writer. So, I'm not saying that, own voices, stamp of approval, but I am saying give it some thought and look at what they're producing. There's been some small progress since the CCBC report came out. I told you some of the more recent years show a little progress. So I think from the Black books went from 10% to 13%. Yay. But taken together, this is from the CCBC, they said that taken together, books about white children, talking bears, trucks, monsters, and potatoes, etc., represent nearly 3/4 of children's and young adult books published in 2019. I would take this a step further and point out that within the small subset of books featuring BIPOC characters, many of the stories revolve around brokenness. Author and illustrator Christopher Myers aptly named this landscape an apartheid of literature. So think back to South Africa. He describes this as a place where characters of color are limited to the townships of occasional historical books that concern themselves with the legacies of civil rights and slavery, but are never given a pass card to traverse the lands of adventure, curiosity, imagination, or personal growth. Myers challenges us to broaden our assumption that children need mirrors merely for the sake of reflection. He suggests that books integrated into children's worldview aren't merely mirrors, but also become maps. And if we follow his premise of books as maps, what path are our children led down when every road leads to enslavement, strife, prejudice, and poverty? In an article for the New York Times, Christopher Myers' father, the late author Walter Dean Myers, shared his thoughts on why so many young people find solace in his books. They have been struck by the recognition of themselves in the story, a validation of their existence as human beings, an acknowledgement of their value by someone who understands who they are. It is the shock of recognition at the highest level. A prolific author of over 100 books for children and young adults, the elder Myers went on to write that books transmit values. They explore our common humanity. What is the message when some children are not represented in these books? Where are Black children going to get a sense of who they are and what they can be? And what are the books that are being published about Blacks? Black history is usually depicted as folklore about slavery, and then a fast forward to the civil rights movement. Then I'm told that Black children, and boys in particular, don't read. Small wonder. There is work to be done. So what are we to do? My recommendation to parents is to fill your child's life with images and representations of every facet of our rich culture. And because we're homeschoolers and educators, I think our bookshelves are the best places to begin. Claim literary mirrors as your own and let them flow freely in your home. Get a library card and a free Libby account for audiobooks and ebooks from the library. Buy your kids a Kindle and get an Audible account and make close friends with a local or online Black bookseller. Settle in and get comfortable. Take your bra off maybe and read Black books with your children. What should you look for in literary mirrors? I hear this come up a lot because we don't have a lot of open and go resources that we can just purchase and get all the things we need. So what are we looking for? Well, we want pictures and stories of melanated children having fun, playing, and interacting with their families and environments in positive ways. We want biographies showcasing women and people of color who have lived exciting lives or made impactful contributions to our communities. Historical fiction that shares the viewpoints and authentic experiences of Black people across various time periods and throughout major historical events. If your child says they don't like studying Black history, you're using the wrong books. The story is fascinating. And even the sad parts, when told well and appropriately, make you happy. They give you joy because look how far we've come. They thought it wasn't going to happen, but here we are. It makes you feel pride in the past and what people before us went through in order for us to sit here in this church this morning with our bottled water and our cute clothes and be talking to one another. We also want to have stories that include cultural signals, elements that give a head nod to the African American experience through illustrations and photographs and descriptions of food and music and language and interactions that children recognize as familiar. So when I started homeschooling my daughter, I had this list of books, to read from, and these were like the best of the best books. And the books were really good. I'm not taking away from them. It's just that in all the books, the kids were romping through the fields and her blonde, bouncy curls shimmered in the sunlight as her blue eyes glinted off the ocean breeze. And, after a while, I had to think to myself, no wonder the girl hid the Black dolls. What did I think was going to happen? So I think that those little head nods, those stories, even if they don't have illustrations, the chapter books that talk about her thick curls that her grandmama had to work with that morning before she left for church, bounced off of the sidewalk or whatever, that our kids can look at and be like, I am normal. I am good. Contemporary novels that feature Black characters but are not about being Black. Hear me on this. I am Heritage Mom. I share many books about being Black. I love those books. But every time our kids pick up a book that has Black people in it, the book doesn't have to be about being Black. That's abnormal. So the book is just a book. If you're a little kid's book, you went fishing with your grandpa, and he threw you on his shoulder. You thought you wanted to do the worm, but you were scared and grandpa had to do it for you. If you're a middle schooler, you went to school, to the new school. You were so excited with your new school clothes, and the girl whose locker was next to yours didn't do right by you. She was being mean girl. You had to go home and talk to your grandma about it, your mom. Your dad didn't like it. He doesn't want anybody picking on his baby girl. If you're in high school, you're reading about that stress about what should you do when you graduate? Should I go to college? I mean, I could follow in my parents' footsteps. My relatives down south said I could move down there and help them homestead and learn about living on the land again. I have so many options. I'm conflicted. Those are experiences, life experiences. Can we have a coming of age story? Can we have regular romance? Romance that isn't torn away by the master and never to see again, but like where you're like, he look good, and I know I look good in my Spanx, so we gonna, go out like this, or whatever it may be. Can we have a regular story that is filled with Black people, but isn't about the fact that they're Black? Nonfiction books by or about women and people of color highlighting subject matter expertise in various fields of study, including entrepreneurship and visual and performing arts and activism and business and science and writing and technology and leadership and travel, they all exist. Our kids can read about anything that interests them, and they can read about a Black person doing it. And they should. Not just doing it, but doing it well, and to be honest, usually excelling in it. Setting new standards and new heights. Our kids should know those people. I grew up outside of Chicago, and one of the popular school field trips was going into the city of Chicago and going on a tour of houses and buildings designed by the architect Frank Lloyd Wright. And it fascinated me. I went and I was like jaw dropped. I mean, he did things that I just had never seen before. And as I was riding the bus back to school, I distinctly remember thinking, I wish I was white, because then I could be an architect. Well, kids today, our kids should never have that issue. We can point out building after building after building and magnificent, beautiful projects and gardens and statues and all the things. And they need to know that someone just like them did that very thing. Otherwise, I'd be an architect. I wouldn't be here with you guys right now. Poetry that reflects our culture. I think that poetry goes really underused in the homeschooling world, and especially in the Black homeschooling world. Poetry is where it's at, y'all. It's short. You short on time. Poetry is short. It's beautiful. There's a lot of it, more than we can ever get through. And it pulls no punches, and it tells you exactly what life was like back then, today, now. It reflects the times, and it's one of the best ways to teach our children about Black culture. Integrating mirrors like these is an ongoing but rewarding job. If you guys follow my blog or my website, or you follow me on social media, you've seen these pictures before. Every year before the beginning of the school year, I take a picture of my kids' history books for the year and some of the other subjects, mostly history, historical fiction, and all of that. And I put them on my stairs like that. So this is 2 different years, and I share them publicly because I want people to see that there's a different way. So we don't have to use what's readily available. Blow up the spot. Don't do that. And as I told someone said, but I'm scared my kid won't learn enough about like Thomas Jefferson or something. And I'm like, they will. He's in those books, but it depends on who's telling the story. They learn about all my kids know about all those people, but I decide who tells the story of how those things unfolded. And then I will just throw out there, history's not on the SAT, y'all. There's no reason that you have to pursue the traditional path. This is your opportunity to explain to your kids who they are and where they came from. And these books are good. Integrating mirrors like this, though, is hard. It's rewarding, though. It's a job. I'm not going to lie about that. It requires intention, and we don't have the luxury of the huge curriculum expos filled with resources for our kids. And quite honestly, that sucks. But Black parents have been making a way out of no way for hundreds of years. Why would we stop now? Seek out Black curricula. I provide lesson guides called Heritage Packs filled with Black book recommendations covering African geography and Black folk tales and fairy tales and Black history and hymn studies and beautiful explorations of the Deep South and much more. You can check them out in the hall today. My website is filled with hundreds, I want to say thousands, but I didn't count, so I'll say many hundreds of Black book recommendations. But I'm not the only one. There are other parents in this room right now and online who are creating the things we need and sharing them with others. We don't have $1 million budgets. So we're depending on word of mouth. We're depending on you to come and use the things that you say you want. Be diligent about finding them. And how much is enough? This is a question people have asked. How do we know when we've furnished our home with enough mirrors? How do we know when we've shared enough Black history? Well, how do you know when you've shared enough white history? I mean, the question becomes a matter of the heart. There is no exact number. For me, the number of mirrors illuminating our home and my stairs increased rapidly and deeply when I saw the beneficial effects on my children, and my interest in this area grew. But there's no such thing as a perfect library. And while I may not have a magic number that constitutes a worthy collection, I know that our aims must be broader than the single story. Nigerian author Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie describes the problem of a single story, and she says that a single story creates stereotypes. And the problem with stereotypes is not that they're untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story, and the consequence of a single story is this: it robs people of dignity. It makes the recognition of our equal humanity difficult. The problem of a single story isn't resolved simply by reading multiple books about the same people group. You could read, 10 books about Black people to your children, but if all the books focus on slavery or urban violence, then you may be unintentionally perpetuating the single story, even in your own home. When we expose our children to a one-dimensional story about a group of people, especially their own people, it limits their understanding of who we truly are and who they can become. African American experiences are diverse and unique. The Black experiences of the South do not necessarily reflect those of the North. Whew. That's a good word right there, I can say from experience. Nor do inner city situations parallel rural settings. Make sure your classroom, or in this case, your home library, reflects this diversity, as well as that of Blacks living in places such as the Caribbean and Africa and Great Britain. This was all explained by children's illustrator Floyd Cooper. Even within a single culture, there are many stories to be told and explored. I share a lot about what I'm speaking about today on Instagram at Heritage Mom Blog, and it was there that I recently received a comment from a white woman expressing her concerns about the entire collapse of America in a conversation about how we should approach including voices of people of color in our curriculum. I know this woman, she's a sister in Christ, and I know she didn't mean to come across as she did, but her sentiments are at the root of what many feel, that a move away from an all-white curriculum is a move away from Americana. But the most patriotic people in the house are those who want to include all of our country's people because they recognize that to love a country is to love its people. Not its signs and symbols, not even its documents, but its people. That is what a country is, including the indigenous peoples who were here first, descendants of the enslaved on whose backs this entire country was built, and the immigrants from all over the world, including, but not only including, Western European countries who have joined in to make our country what it is today. So in these times when prioritizing your child's emotional health and sense of self may be ridiculed, disparaged, and dismissed as being too woke, move forward boldly and with authority on behalf of your family, knowing that you not only have the right to raise your children in the way they should go, but also the responsibility to literally pour your heart into theirs. Today, you're writing a chapter in your family's history book. You're taking your heritage and culture, either consciously or unconsciously, and you're sprinkling it with your own special sauce before handing it off to your children. We're all here today because we share a vision for what childhood can be. Our kids, when left to maneuver in their own way, will handle their part, but wouldn't it be great if we as parents could be the ones to help usher our children to true freedom? Because a free bird leaps on the back of the wind and floats downstream till the current ends and dips his wing in the orange sun rays and dares to claim the sky. We have already decided to go against the grain of what society tells us we have to be and what others expect us to do with our baby birds. Nothing I'm saying is new to us. All I'm suggesting today is that we take it a step further and solidify our rebellion. I hope that you're able to take some of this and begin to unapologetically infuse your home with our beautiful culture and heritage. May your children be well-rooted so their branches can grow widely. As for me, my daughter is no longer caged. She's a free bird, wild and free. I've gifted each of you a copy of my book, A Place to Belong, which covers literary mirrors in much more depth, along with many other areas related to raising our kids to celebrate their heritage and community and the world. I'll be signing books at my booth today and tomorrow, or wherever you grab me in the hall, and I would love to sign yours. But I would like to ask for something in return, something that's really, really important for the work that I'm doing. I want you to go to my website, heritagemom.com, and sign up for my newsletter. That's one. I want you to follow me on Instagram and Facebook and take a picture of this book by itself, or you're all looking cute today, hair done and all, with yourself in it, and talk about it on social media. And then finally, please go to Amazon and leave a review. Without those things, I can't continue doing the work that I'm doing on behalf of our families. I truly need your support, and I know that there's not another room in the world where I'm gonna get it the way that I'm gonna get it from here. Thank you so much for your time today.